Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Heart Centered Therapist podcast. I'm your host, Sindee Gozansky. Today, it is a true privilege and honor for me to introduce you to my guest, Sally McQuillen. Sally McQuillen is a psychotherapist in private practice, specializing in addiction recovery, grief, and trauma healing. An avid reader with a double major in writing and dance criticism in college, she began working in public relations and marketing prior to obtaining her master's degree in social work. Reaching for Beautiful is Sally's first book. She and her husband live on the North Shore of Chicago, where they raise their 3 children. And we are going to talk about her work, her life, her book, and so much more. It's such a pleasure to meet you today, Sally.
The pleasure is all mine. I love the idea of a heart-centered anything, a therapist, a human, and that is what I am. I'm really trying to let my heart lead me in all ways.
Yes, I am a big fan of that. And I love how you have the letters love for those who are listening, love in the background. And I want to also show this beautiful copy of your book, which is coming out in April, a few weeks away as we're recording this. Reaching for Beautiful, a memoir of loving and losing a wild child. Sally McQuillen. That's what we're talking about today. You had a beautiful gift and blessing and so much grief and loss.
Truly, there were so many different things that fueled writing this story. It is a story designed to capture my son Christopher's life, my firstborn, whom I lost at the age of 21. We lost him 9 years ago, and he and 3 other boys died on January 3rd of 2016. They were all partying up in Wisconsin at a friend's lake house and decided to go out onto a frozen lake, and none of them survived that. And so it was I think losing a child is always a traumatic loss. And so I love that I'm speaking to an audience of very likely clinicians and therapists who are going to appreciate the role of trauma in this. But I think most people may or may not even know that the loss of a child is inherently traumatic. And that's just one of the things I like to emphasize. It certainly was my experience. And it was such a tragic and public loss.
And it was your son and 3 other boys?
Correct.
Wow, tragic.
And I think it's possible that 2 of the boys were maybe age 20, and then two of them, including my own, were 21. So, yeah, out of time. And
It's
and
not
so
supposed to ever happen that way. That adds to the tragedy of losing a child.
I think that's right. I think anything that happens, like, it's been really interesting to me that over the course of time, I remember it was maybe 6 months after. It had to be a little bit after that because I took 7 months off of my work at an outpatient addiction center to just survive. And then when I returned to my work, I remember this was when trauma was becoming more of a catchword. I don't even know how to put it, but it was, oh, everybody's talking about trauma and everybody's revamping their addiction treatment centers to address trauma. And I remember,
Absolutely. Like the
right?
trauma-informed
Yes, the whole
approach and all the
trauma
big wigs
informed.
with trauma coming out with new books and so on.
Exactly. So that was happening simultaneously as I was experiencing this trauma in my life. And I remember taking a course, and it was like, Sally, you're traumatized. You can't sit here and listen to this right now. It's
Yeah.
too provocative. It's too triggering. What were you thinking taking a trauma course at this time? And yet I've so appreciated and benefited from becoming personally and professionally trauma informed. And anything that's sudden, out of order, in the case of a child, this was a loss of there were so many layers of the loss, but loss of part of my identity, a third of my heart.
Yeah. And you didn't have a choice to become trauma informed. You had to, and are still living through the trauma and the grief and finding a way that this fits in your life as you continue to raise your other children and help clients as a therapist, and then help other people by writing your story and sharing with others who could be going through something similar. Whether it's like, I love how you say, like, raising a child on the edge on the seat of your pants, or
Yes.
dealing with grief and loss.
It's interesting to me because spiritually, I'd always thought I'd been guided to attempt to let go of fear, which is, I think, as a little girl, I was fearful. I didn't know that I was already living with some of my own depression and anxiety. I just knew that I felt things deeply. And then to be able to find myself working with clients and seeing in the world, especially when everywhere we turn, fear is so predominant, to just appreciate the fear that is percolating everywhere and then try to learn for myself how to restore a feeling of safety after losing Christopher, and then use that to help inform my own healing and the healing that I can offer other people. It's all been so interconnected, Sindee.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a brief statement that just really sums up what you're talking about, and it's so powerful. I just want to read this for a minute. It's about your book, and that readers may see themselves in Sally's bittersweet illusion of trying to keep her wild child safe, in how she is challenged to let go of her fear, guilt, and regret in order to forgive herself, and in the ways grief teaches her about the power of love. And that just is astounding to me, because it's what you're talking about in this moment here today with me, a stranger, with listeners, as a way to, like, wake us up, right? That there is this part of life that's poignant, that's going to hurt, and it's going to hurt so much. And part of that hurt derives from love. So, with that, I guess I want to know about Christopher. Can you share a little about him, who he was, and help us get to know your beautiful son?
Thank you so much for asking. If you'd asked me no other question, I could sit here all day. And that's one of the things that I do want people to know if they're supporting friends who've lost a child, that it really is not only okay to ask about them, but desired. And because we feel forsaken of bragging rights, and
Yes.
to be able to share him with my readers and with you, he just he challenged me from the very start. And I guess I love a challenge. I am especially enamored with handfuls. I really liked, I wouldn't have had it any other way. He was running at 9 months. He was busy. He was into everything. When he was 2 years old and his little sister was born, a lot of my time was spent sort of protecting her from him because he wasn't thrilled to not be the only child. And he was just filled to the brim with life and zest and enthusiasm, and lived so fully. And it's interesting, I was talking to someone just yesterday, and she said, it from what she'd heard from other people, and she never knew Christopher, this person, he said in his 21 years, he touched people in profound ways. And I think it is because he was so present and so loving. And I think that, so he was an addict. He struggled with addiction. We ended up needing to send him away to get help at the age of 16. And So that was a sacrifice because we had the privilege of being able to pay to send him away, which many people don't. We also knew, as recovering alcoholics ourselves, what it takes to intervene and try to help guide someone into recovery. And so he got clean and sober and had a period of 3 years during which he could, I think when you feel things deeply, as I do, as his father does, as he did, sometimes you turn to, and of course, many people are abusing alcohol and drugs regardless. But I think when you feel everything so acutely, and when you have attention deficit, which Christopher did,
I was going
you
to ask about that.
he definitely did. And it's funny because back at the time when we discovered it, I talk about this in the book, and I think that therapists will chuckle a little bit alongside me, is that, first of all, he was my firstborn. I'd never parented before, but I also hadn't really recognized, I didn't know what attention deficit was. And so here's this sort of neurodivergent way of being. And I'm just discovering what that is as I find that I'm challenged, that he's struggling in school, that he has difficulty focusing and staying put. And this is at a time when we weren't as we are now, where so many children have been diagnosed at an early age and they're provided with all sorts of resources. We were just beginning to do that and have to advocate for those. So I found myself advocating for different
Mm.
accommodations and resources at a time when school systems were not necessarily, were a little more reluctant to, I think they still might be a little reluctant to diagnose, which is understandable. We don't want to throw too many labels on any, but at the same time, it then delayed us in being able to put some of the necessary provisions in place. And I felt like I was doing something wrong. I didn't know any better. And so the thing that I thought people might chuckle about is that when we were sitting in a diagnostic clinician's office, somebody who specialized in ADD, and Christopher at, I think, maybe 10 was being tested, my husband and I are looking at the little brochure, and we're looking at this checklist of all of these things that are criteria for this diagnosis. And I'm looking at them and I'm thinking, oh, maybe that one would fit me. Well, my husband looks through it and he's basically checked off all of them, every single solitary, or maybe 18 out of 20. And he says, I don't have ADD. You have ADD. I think I might be a little compulsive, but so we just laughed about, because it wasn't until that point that we even really recognized that I could see, oh, this is my husband. This is my
Mhm.
son. And it gave me an opportunity to have a better understanding of what made raising him more difficult,
Yeah.
albeit wonderful, because I could not have loved that ball of energy any more than I did
I
and
mean,
still do.
even that glimpse of his younger years really lets us into his energy and his love for life. Like that really comes out, and how much you love being challenged, and clearly, right, because you became a mama and then a therapist and
Yes,
writer. So
yes.
lots of challenges going on. And I think it's also important to really let our listeners know things weren't always the way they are now in our education system, in the world of therapy. And so back then, the kid may, if they were lucky, may have gotten some help and accommodations and perhaps a diagnosis or a learning disorder type of diagnosis. Definitely the parents weren't even considered if they had anything going on with them. Versus now, a mom might say, oh, I have ADHD. I think my daughter has the same thing. And everybody gets help. But it
Exactly.
wasn't like that. And Sally and I were both talking about being older therapists and still practicing, still seeing clients, still doing our little side entrepreneurial efforts and always wanting to learn and grow and how important that is. So I'm hoping people will feel that as we talk today. because
Very
it's
much so.
hopeful. It's so important. It's like how we want to live. And you live clearly honoring Christopher and carrying on something that he wanted you to do.
I certainly aspire to embrace so many of his strengths. I when we talk about this open-heartedness, to me, I certainly in the years following Christopher's death, there was a part of me that wanted to armor up my heart and protect myself and retreat, withdraw, and then just as I was coming out of that, it's funny, not funny, but COVID happened and in
I
some
was
ways,
wondering what the time frame was with it.
so 4 years later, COVID began. And believe it or not, and I think this is one of the other things that I like to educate people about, especially in this community, is that I certainly would have been, had I received a diagnosis, it would have been complicated and prolonged grief. But I suspect that most people who do lose a child would meet the criteria for prolonged grief. And we have to begin to recognize that grief over the loss of a child in particular, to me, at least in my own experience, is something that I will carry for the rest of my life. Now, does that mean I will always feel the same degree of acuity? Actually, what it means is sometimes I will be taken out in a similar way, but I am not sobbing and consumed by that daily anymore. But years, for years, and I was functioning, but my heart had been completely shattered. And it takes time to restore that. And then the other thing that we know as therapists is that if we've had any other losses in our life, or if we've had any former traumatic experiences, whether it's parenting or losing a child, those all come to the fore.
Absolutely. Right. And so hence it's like you're 5 years into the loss of Christopher and COVID happens roughly. And so then there's this like amplification of loss and isolation and lack of
Interestingly
control.
enough, because I was a little bit later to the game as a therapist, because I'd gotten my master's degree in the 90s and then had the opportunity to raise my children and do a number of other part-time things, but had let my license lapse and then didn't restore it until Christopher was heading off to college. I am actually a newbie. I've been in practice for maybe 11 years now, but in private practice, only 5 or 6.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. First off, I'm not going to
yes.
let you call yourself a newbie with your life experience and already so much practice. Yeah,
Yeah.
you have
Yeah.
the wisdom, but it is important that we all have those trajectories. I love that you were able to get your license and then raise your family. What permission you just gave somebody who's trying to decide, can they do that? Even just take the summer off and be with their baby.
That's right. That's right. Depending upon what your choices are, and there are all sort of factors, different factors that help making that decision. But I feel as if a couple of things happened simultaneously. One was that started my private practice, and COVID happened not that long after that. Maybe with a year, for a year, I'd been seeing clients in my home, and then after that, COVID shut things down, but I
Mm.
had this really great gift of being able to see clients through telehealth. And I had what I felt was Christopher patting me on the shoulder and saying, Mom, this is the work you're meant to be doing. This work gives you purpose. This work is going to help you bring whatever strengths, whatever your experience is to bear, and I want you to do this. And so I really felt like I was fueled, and in some ways didn't feel all of the things that so many other people during that time were dealing with, because I also was still in a space where I'd done some trauma healing, specifically by going to do some EMDR as in conjunction with my regular therapy. And that was hugely helpful for me, specifically around the way that I felt about, well, it gets muddy, all of the grief and regret, but the fear and the way that I reflected on my not being able to be there with my son as he were afraid when he
Oh,
departed. So
oh,
that's what I really had to work through in that way. But there was still this residual feeling of not being as safe in the world. That has taken some time to get my bearings around. And so in some ways, oh, I don't have to go out to the grocery store. I don't ha I can order in, or I can do so I can avoid some of the things that are unsettling to me.
mhm.
Even at 4 years into my grief journey, I was really I was okay. I was okay being at home.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really appreciate you sharing that and just letting people know what it's like. And the fact that in some way, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but like I got chills when you told me you could almost feel Christopher saying, Mom, this is your purpose. You're good at this. You can help people. Like in some way, there was a closeness that or presence that you felt. And how beautiful that you could be open to that. We long for that, but there it was.
I have, as a feeler and as someone who's been desperately seeking to develop a belief that my son's spirit lives on, I have to say that I've intuitively just because I do operate even as a therapist very intuitively, and so there is a stronger sense of security that he guides me. And of course I want to make him proud.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I feel that from you, that intuitive and like spiritual underpinning, which of course gets muddied with such a devastating loss, and how we talk about fear and connected to that is faith and even just going on. And we will talk about that, but going back for just a minute when you're saying feeling, because Sally, like, this is a heart centered conversation we're having. This is heartfelt. Sometimes you're teary. Sometimes I'm just like, wow, kind of trying to take in this experience because it also feels sacred for me to be able to talk to you and get this gift. I've sat with clients who have also lost children, and it's hard to sometimes know what to do. And in a way, like I love them the most because they also need so much love. But you said something like, my husband and I and Christopher, we're all feelers. And you were talking about the addiction, I think, and you were saying when you're feelers. I think we didn't finish that, and it seemed really important.
I think it is important in terms of it was interesting, someone previously asked me about whether being a therapist was helpful to me in any way as a griever. And my first blush was to dismiss that. And then I thought to myself, actually, to have come through my addiction experience and to have built a spiritual foundation where vulnerability is encouraged, that then facilitated getting into becoming a therapist. And I think as therapists, we recognize the value of feeling our feelings. But I can tell you that no one, even someone like me who intellectually values the importance of feeling those deep feelings and celebrates being a deep feeler, wants to feel the kind of pain that this caused. We fight it. And yet I will say that I knew the importance of attempting to let it just come, to let it, and I don't even know how much of a choice I had. I was so very fraught with it that I don't know that I could have kept it at bay in any way. But there are times we do this number on ourselves as humans where, and I did do this. Oh, I've gotta be strong in a way that maybe didn't necessarily serve me, or I've got to be a helper or a caretaker. So if I'm out in the world and someone else is upset because they know what I've gone through, then my inclination, my first blush would be to want to be able to be compassionate with you. But
In a way, that's the therapist liability. We're so good at
right,
that.
yes, it's
You've
where it can
mentioned
become,
that
yeah.
you and your husband too definitely grieved differently in some ways. And also he has done writing as part of his healing too, which is so interesting. We could talk for hours on this, but yeah, the healing journey is different. People express it differently. And also you have to protect yourself differently. And you said you're both in recovery. So here you are, the most painful loss one can even imagine. And you're in recovery. And it's one of those kind of disenfranchised griefs because people don't know what to say to you.
They don't. And it was so conflictual to me to both understand that this was, because the truth is, this is maybe too much information as if I'm here in a therapy session, but I think, Mindy, I recognize that I've always been someone who's carrying feelings that may or may not show up on the surface.
Yeah.
I just wrote, and I don't think our pain, our internal pain is visible, but I also think that in the way that many of us do cope with our pain, just such as saying, I've got to show up and put on a brave face, or I'm going to take care of you and put that ahead of maybe taking care of myself at times. What that meant that when this happened, I really I recognized these things intellectually, but I also felt a reenactment of something I'd experienced before, which was people see you, but they cannot feel what you're feel. They can't, and no, and this is just, oh, Sally, this is true always, but I didn't realize it until there was such a starkness and when you're living out every other parent's worst fear, they are not necessarily wanting to come and talk to you about it, in
Right.
fact,
So
they'd
even
really like
that,
to run, so it was really ultimately healing for me to appreciate that and take care of myself, give myself compassion because there was a greater feeling of alienation. And as you said, Joe and I very much share different things, but we had our differences and we also were so grief filled that we couldn't be there. So there is this, it's funny, it's ironic, there's a loneliness to the grief journey, much like the loneliness of any depression. One of the ways that we know that we're depressed is that we feel alone even when we're really not. This feels isolating, and so when people can't approach you even for a moment to acknowledge what you or take a guess at what you might be experiencing. I found that hard.
yeah, very hard. And I imagine some of the hope is that this book will break down those barriers a little, help people see that it doesn't have to be that hard, that you can connect with somebody who is struggling with so much loss, right? Let's reduce some of the alienation.
I would really love that people understand that there are no words that are the very right words to say, but just the willingness to approach and acknowledge a person who's grieving. It's such a gift that we can give. And look, then you can dip into that and then dip right back out. You don't have to endure in the same way that those of us are grieving do. And even for us, I think that's what I was saying about the value of being a therapist is that you know that you want to allow yourself to go there and spend time in it, but you also know that it's important to come back out and try to live your life. And I have two other living children that very much need me and that I don't know that they need me anymore. In fact, they probably would deny they need me at all. But that's a good thing, right? But I
Yeah.
want to be able to be as present for them and everyone I love as I can be. And that that takes time. So that's one of the hard things for the people that are bystanders or friends or family, is that it takes longer than they might expect.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And to just not be scared of engaging, because the bereaved person also doesn't necessarily want to stay in the depth of that conversation. Maybe to touch on it, to feel that honor, the respect, and then to pop out of it, or to recognize, oh, they could be there for me in this way. And also maybe help me function, or maybe sit with me in a coffee shop so I don't have to like think everybody's looking at me because I'm the weird one.
Yes, yes. And I remember various friends saying, "Oh, we don't want to bother you with some of the things that are going on in our lives." And the truth was that I wanted that distraction, because part of the isolation comes from people not wanting to tell you about what's happening in their own lives. Now, were there a couple of times, especially in my earliest days of grief, where I couldn't muster the same degree of empathy and compassion for some people's problems? I have to admit there were,
Yeah.
but mostly I want to hear about what's happening in the lives of my friends. And there's something so refreshing about, oh, you're worrying about what outfit to wear. I mean, just really go ahead and give me a touch of that, because I don't know the last time I've smiled.
Yeah. And now, Sally, you're so able to smile. You have a beautiful smile and the zest for life. I feel that even though I never got to meet Christopher, I feel like you embody so much of him and his spirit that really comes through. It's beautiful.
I hope so. That
Yeah.
would be, yeah, my life's goal, if I could
Yeah.
embody him in those ways.
I'm definitely feeling it. Yes. I also imagine in your situation and other people that I've known, when somebody has lost a child tragically, and in this case, you lost four young people tragically, probably in a relatively close area or a couple towns, like then that becomes public. And that just really complicates, I think, being there, being in your world. Like that's when I was thinking about, oh, someone sitting with you in the coffee shop, because like maybe people don't recognize you, but I imagine there's still this, oh my gosh, all of this was in the news. And this is my child, and how do I have privacy? And the whole thing, that's just confounding to me to deal with on the extra levels of all of the loss and agony.
You're so right. And it's interesting because that trauma and the need for safety manifested itself for me in some social anxiety, because of the times that I would be faced with, out in the community, faced with unexpected situations or things that people would say. And at the same time, I want to express my immense gratitude for a community that was so sensitive and thoughtful and supportive. And so it was beautiful. I really feel like we were very carried by our community. And I also feel as if there was a level of exposure by virtue of the
Yeah.
public nature of this that was difficult for me. And I remember, I think it was one of my brothers saying, "Well, you're a pretty social human being." And I literally think I forgot that I had been, until I started to come back to myself. And I remembered, oh, I love people. I don't need to be vigilant about what might people have moved. They've moved on. It's no longer going to be the first thing they necessarily think about when or it may be, but there's been an adaptation.
Yeah. Yeah. It really powerful and important to remember how many nuances can exist for somebody experiencing a loss like that. So you did mention you still had to parent your two other children. Not that you're going to be able to give like a specific tip, Sally. I get that, but like
Mhm.
something general about like how did you and Joe, your husband, continue to parent?
I think two of the things that I was very mindful of, because I was working on these things before Christopher died and then thereafter, was that before he died, because he'd been clean and sober, he'd had that chapter, he'd returned to drinking and using drugs, and I knew I had a very critical choice to make. I could be extremely fearful about that, and I work in my practice with a lot of people who are impacted by their loved one's addictions.
Okay.
In some ways, that feels like my extra specialty, and
Right. I was going to ask about that. Like with
it just
affected others.
really turns out that I'm ever made aware of the impact on those of us who are loving someone who's struggling in an addiction, whether it's a partner or a child. It might even be harder than the experience of addiction itself. And so that's saying a lot. I mean, they're both this, this is not, addiction is a tough one. So I feel like, where was I going? I lost my train of thought. I think,
Oh, before. So you were
oh, I
already
know.
on
So
your
before I was
journey.
already, yes,
Yeah.
it's already beginning to, thank you. I was conscious of trying not to be in fear. Then fear got very much reawakened for me. And I was trying with my living children to do what I had with Christopher, which was to let go of it. And to not then, because I'd gotten a really tough memo, so to speak, that bad things can happen, not assume that bad things would continue to. So I think I needed to really, so there were two things that I was keeping on the forefront of my mind with regard to my children was not being in fear and being present in such a way that I was very much, whereas I'd made the mistake of over trying to shelter
Yeah.
them in some ways in the past, I was also, the only thing I wanted to shelter them from was my pain, because I didn't want to impose my pain on them. And so, to whatever extent I could be available to them, I tried to be.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. What a great mom. Yeah. Thank
It's,
you for
I
sharing.
think, yeah, I think as mothers, many of us are so just hard on ourselves anyway. And then in the arena of parenting, we imagine there's some right way to do this. And all we can really, and I used to just dismiss this idea of doing the best we can, but now I really hold it up because that's all we can do. It's all we can do.
Yeah. Sally, it's so true. And you lived that. You had to do the best you could in the agony of the grief, and then you also see your clients doing that. It changes everything, and I think it can reduce the fear a little bit too of walking in this world, right? Because we start to see, yeah, we're all the same.
This essential life lesson for me as a therapist and as a mother and as a person is to begin to appreciate that we are just here to move through challenges and pain and try to let go of fear, and we are not meant to be spared from those. In fact, that's how we do evolve and grow. And so that's the other part of
Mm.
what I keep learning over and over again.
Yeah. Oh, so beautiful, Sally. And for anybody who does have a spiritual or religious tradition, that's a big part of it. We're not meant to be spared from that. And it's how we walk with it and hold on to our faith and belief and love also. One thing as you talk and as you write that I think is important to remind our audience, therapists, and other people listening, and I've learned this with some of my clients who've had tremendous losses, that you have 3 children. And you say that, I have 3 children, and 2 of them are living. But I think it's so important, and maybe that's just a little nuance, but it seems to me like it's very important to the parent or to the mom for them to be recognized that way.
Hugely, at least for me, and I know I have probably an added share of undying loyalty, but hugely, because again, it relates to wanting to be seen in terms of what's going on inside. And yes, have, I'm so grateful I got to be Christopher's mom, but I still get to, and I'm going to claim that I still get to. And so, yeah, always.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And look, we can't learn this in a book. This is not written anywhere. Maybe you wrote in your book. I haven't read the whole thing. But that's why it's so important for us to talk and connect and have these real life conversations, because that's going to help another person. This is really, to me, like that healing that happens in community. And that happened for you. And, it's happening in this tiny community of you and me today. That's great. But I want to move that into this community process for you. Like, you became a writer, you started doing journaling. This is one of my favorite things that you talk about, is how you started journaling. And I'm thinking, as a therapist, we suggest to our clients to do journaling. A lot of times we sort of poo-poo it for ourselves. We're like, no, I'm too busy. I can't do that. I have to do my documentation. But you tell me about your writing process and how that happened, because it's so inspiring.
That's so funny. I'd
Mhm.
poo-pooed it.
Oh, you did too?
And I had poo-pooed it even for myself. It had been suggested to me numerous times, and I didn't know until I needed to find out how healing a process writing could be. And it served me in so many ways. I could remember and process every part of what it was like to raise Christopher. I could reconcile and heal my guilt, even my self-pity. I could begin to just all of it. It really enabled me to draft after draft to, but even that first draft that no one would have wanted to ever have seen from the perspective of a therapist, to actually be able to identify a feeling and put it on a page. Like, one of the things that I really tried to do was articulate as best I could feelings that are very hard to impart. And so I did as best I could to do that. And I think journaling about feelings is really, it actually ends up being, I know it sounds funny, but it's fun to eventually be able to tease it out, because there's a sense of relief and satisfaction when you've found the words that can express what your experience is.
Yeah. Yeah. That naming, it really can be powerful. And I see the huge emotional impact on you as you remember that experience of kind of gutting through that process of journaling and drafting. And I know it took a lot of drafts, and you shared that your husband writes way faster than you do.
I started this, and then he decided to write afterwards. And lo and behold, he's written 2 books already
Oh,
and has a third one en route. And I suspect that this will be my one and only on on the life of my child. But what's the other thing I just was at the tip of my tongue? Oh, community. You mentioned community. And here, as somebody that has spoken about her social anxiety, I was able to connect it in several ways during the course of my grief journey, which I would highly recommend, is
mm,
getting support within the context of a group. And for me, being able to take those words that I'd written on a page and share them with community, which was my writing group, my writing partners, was also a healing aspect of this. And then to be able to share here with you again, I feel selfish about it all, because it's just so helpful to me, and I hope then in turn helpful to others.
I'm sure it will be. And while we're talking about it, I just want to remind everybody again, it's Reaching for Beautiful, Sally McQuillen, a memoir of loving and losing a wild child. And the thing about this book, like I said, I haven't read through the whole thing, but I've read parts of it. And like your conversational style, even like your dialogue, like it just really captures that sense of you, of Christopher, of like there are scenes in the movie theater, there are scenes like A Christmas Morning, like so much that's poignant and powerful and just honest, like easy to read, honest, and yet so many lessons. And I think it's really going to resonate for a lot of people around addiction, challenges of parenting, of being with an affected other, and then of course the grief. Really powerful.
I hope that it will. I know it's not for the faint of heart. It's not an easy book to turn the pages of,
Mhm.
but I really hope that it will. That's what I was saying about the irony of, okay, when you're grieving, you do feel alone, but if it helps people who are grieving feel less alone, I would like to be able to at least offer that comfort.
Yeah.
And but for anyone who is, as you said, raising a child that keeps them on their toes or is
Yeah.
different and special in any way.
And I
Yeah.
guess Christopher would be fine with being called a wild child.
Oh, I have no doubt that he would not deny it for a second. And one of the sort of messages that I've gotten from him is that the only thing that he cares about is that I speak the truth and that it helps others.
Wow. Wow. Mm. Gives me shivers. That's amazing. So powerful. Yeah. Sally, I really wanted you to share this other part of your healing process that I heard you talk about, and it blew me away. So I guess you were talking about when you first started, like even playing with journaling or writing, you would do it on your phone. Like you would maybe do a notes thing or something. And tell us what that felt like and how that connected you to Christopher.
Thank you for emphasizing connection in that way because a lot of what my grief journey continues to be about is ever staying connected to the spirit of my son. And so it was just funny that that's the way that it began, that I was pulling out my phone, I was in the notes section, and I was just putting little entries in, and I was writing to Christopher. I was writing him a letter. It was both a love letter and it was, this is what I'm grappling with. Where are you? And where have you gone? And I need to feel like you can hear me. Or you can, like, I remember when we were driving from his funeral service to the cemetery for his burial, and I remember wondering if he could see from where, because I didn't yet even have a more visual. I'm such a visual person. I needed to have a visual of where that sort of faith has to overcome not being able to see. But at the same time, I just wanted him to know that we were, did he feel my love? Could he feel my love? That kind of a thing. And that's how it really began. And so that connection, and I want other parents who lost children or anyone who's lost a loved one to begin to develop the belief that I have, if I could inspire that yes, I believe they can. I believe they hear
Mm,
you, they see you, they're with you, and they feel you and
yeah.
they feel. So all of those things.
Yeah. That's amazing. And just the fact that it kind of replicated when you used to be able to text Christopher. And probably you were also texting him things like, "Where are you?" And
Oh, as he would say, 100%. Yes.
yeah.
I often wondered where the heck he was, and he was not very forthcoming.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. As we wrap up, Sally, and I know people are going to want to read the book and learn more about you and, of course, your website. We'll make sure we link everything in the show notes. But in terms of somebody listening who's grieving, maybe they're not grieving a child, but just advice to someone who's grieving, what would you want them to hear from you. You've been there, you are there. Each day is different.
I think if there were one thing, and there's so many things we could talk about, but the one thing would be to use that loss as a permission slip to take better emotional care of yourself than ever before, and bring yourself a gentle compassion. Begin to think about the way that you talk to yourself and treat yourself, and use such kindness and empathy, the kind that you might use with anyone other than you.
Thank you for that. So beautiful and such a blessing you're gifting to others by sharing your story and your life and your hopes for the rest of us to be able to live more fully in honor of Christopher's spirit and energy. So wonderful. Sally, please share with everyone how they can find you, what you have to offer, where they're going to be able to find your book, all of those good things.
Yes, you can find Reaching for Beautiful anywhere books are sold. And by going to my website, www.sallymcquillen, McQuillen.com, and pre-ordering, and it will be out on the 1st of April. So forthcoming very soon.
Oh, that's wonderful. And her website is beautiful. And I love that it has an image of water, which makes me feel like that's another part of your healing journey. I am one of your biggest fans and can't wait to see how your book is received and what's next. And maybe we can find another theme and time to talk again. I just wish you all the best and thank you for everything you shared today with our listeners and giving us so much of your true open-hearted love and spirit.
Beautiful to be with you, Sindee. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed talking about my boy and my journey with you.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. And until next week, stay heart-centered.